The morning I heard my future son-in-law say, "Once we're married, she'll stop asking so many questions," I nearly missed a red light on Interstate 670. For a second, I thought I'd heard him wrong. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ryan Mercer was sitting in the back seat of my black Lincoln Continental, looking out the window like he'd just commented on the weather. Not like he'd casually described changing my daughter's entire life. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I kept my eyes on the road, kept my mouth shut, and listened. That moment changed everything. My name is Frank Dawson. I'm 61 years old and I've lived in Columbus, Ohio my entire life. For 37 years, I worked as an electrical contractor. Long days, early mornings, hard work. The kind of work where nobody cares about your opinions if the lights don't come on when you flip the switch. I retired 2 years ago. At least that was the plan. Turns out, retirement sounded a lot more exciting than it actually was. After 6 months of mowing the lawn, reorganizing my garage, and driving my wife Linda crazy by constantly asking what she wanted to do, I needed something productive. Not because we needed money. I just needed a reason to leave the house. That's how I ended up driving for a private executive transportation company based outside Dublin, Ohio. Mostly business clients, lawyers, bank executives, consultants, people who traveled constantly and preferred having the same driver whenever possible. The schedule suited me. A few mornings each week, a few airport runs, some corporate transportation, nothing complicated. The funny thing is, Ryan became one of my regular passengers before I realized who he was. At first, he was just another guy in a suit, early 30s, expensive watch, always checking emails, always talking on the phone. Then one morning, I heard him say a familiar name, Emily, my daughter. I nearly looked into the mirror so hard I would have driven off the road. Over the next few minutes, pieces started falling into place. The voice, the age, the company, the stories. It was him, Ryan Mercer, my daughter's fiance, the man she'd be marrying in 5 months. The strange part? He had no idea who I was. To be fair, there were reasons. A few months earlier, I'd started extensive dental implant work. My dentist had recommended I wear a mask during recovery because I was self-conscious about the temporary bridge work. I also wore company-issued sunglasses and a black cap. Most clients barely glanced at me. Ryan certainly didn't. Even when he'd come to family dinners before, he wasn't exactly focused on me. Not because he was rude, at least not openly. He was one of those people who walked into a room and naturally made everything about himself. He remembered stories that made him look good. He remembered accomplishments. He remembered compliments. Other people? Not so much. At first, I actually found the situation entertaining. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I'd pick up my future son-in-law and drive him downtown. Meanwhile, he sat 3 feet behind me without the slightest clue he was talking to his future father-in-law. I told Linda about it one evening. She nearly choked on her iced tea. "You're kidding." "I wish." "You mean he doesn't recognize you?" "Not even a little." She laughed so hard tears formed in her eyes. "Frank, that's terrible." "You're smiling." "Because it's funny." And honestly, it was. At least in the beginning. The more time I spent around Ryan, though, the more uncomfortable I became. Not because he was openly cruel. That would have been easier. Instead, it was little things. The way he spoke to restaurant servers. The way he interrupted people. The way every conversation somehow drifted back to him. One morning, another executive shared the ride. The man mentioned his daughter's soccer tournament. Ryan immediately redirected the conversation toward his own college athletic career. The other guy barely finished 2 sentences. Ryan never noticed. Or maybe he didn't care. I kept telling myself none of that meant he was a bad person. Plenty of successful people were self-centered. Plenty matured over time. Emily loved him. That mattered. My daughter wasn't naive. She worked as a school counselor. She spent her days helping teenagers navigate complicated emotions in difficult situations. She was smart, kind, independent. After a rough relationship in her 20s, she'd become much more careful about who she trusted, which was why I tried not to judge Ryan too quickly. Then came that Tuesday morning. The morning everything shifted. Rain tapped softly against the windshield as we headed east. Traffic moved slowly. Ryan's phone rang. He answered immediately. "Yeah," he said. A pause. Then a laugh. A long laugh. The kind that made my stomach tighten. "No, seriously. Once we're married, she'll stop asking so many questions." Silence filled the car. I stared straight ahead. Maybe there was context I wasn't hearing. Maybe he was joking. Maybe... Then he continued. "I know her. She trusts me." My jaw clenched. The voice on the other end said something I couldn't hear. Ryan chuckled again. "Look, right now she's still attached to Columbus. Friends, family, work, all that stuff." A pause. Then the sentence that made my blood run cold. "The farther she is from her family, the easier everything becomes." I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something worse. Recognition. Because I'd heard words like that before. Years ago. From another man who wanted control more than partnership. A man Emily had eventually left. Ryan kept talking casually. Like he was discussing weekend plans. Like he wasn't describing how he intended to reshape someone else's life. By the time we reached his office building, my stomach was in knots. He ended the call, gathered his briefcase, opened the door, then leaned back inside for a second. "See you Thursday." "Yeah, have a good day," I said. My voice sounded normal. Somehow. He stepped onto the sidewalk and disappeared into the building. I sat there for several seconds. The engine idling. Rain sliding down the windshield. Trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I'd only heard part of the conversation. Then another thought hit me. Ryan hadn't said our plans. He hadn't said Emily and I decided. He hadn't said we. Everything he described had been his decision, his timeline, his future, his strategy. And for the first time, I wondered whether the man my daughter was preparing to marry saw her as a partner at all, or something else entirely. I didn't tell Emily what I'd heard. Not that day. Not that week either. For 3 days, I carried it around like a stone in my pocket. Every time my phone rang and I saw her name, I almost said something. Every time she texted about wedding plans, I nearly typed it out. Then I'd stop, delete everything, and tell myself to slow down. After 35 years of marriage, Linda knew exactly when something was bothering me. The following Friday evening, we were sitting on our back patio. Nothing fancy, just 2 old Adirondack chairs, a couple glasses of iced tea, and the sound of cicadas coming from the trees behind our fence. She looked over at me. "You still thinking about Ryan?" I sighed. Maybe I misunderstood. "You don't sound convinced." "I keep replaying it." Linda set her glass down. "What exactly bothers you?" I stared into the yard. "It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it." She nodded. That was exactly it. There hadn't been any hesitation. No uncertainty. No discussion. Ryan had spoken like Emily's future was already settled. Like she was a passenger in a car he was driving. Linda was quiet for a moment. "Then pay attention," she finally said. "What?" "Pay attention before you start accusing anyone of anything." That was good advice. Probably better than I deserved. Because if I'm being honest, part of me already wanted to hate him. Not because of anything he'd done. Because I was scared. And fear can make a father dangerous. So I decided to watch. Nothing more. Just watch. The next week, I picked Ryan up outside his condo near Bridge Park in Dublin. Same routine. Dark suit. Coffee in hand. Phone already pressed against his ear. He slid into the back seat. "Glenn, listen to me," he said before I'd even pulled away. Apparently, I wasn't worth greeting. I drove. He talked. The farther we went, the more interesting the conversation became. I already accepted the offer. A pause. Then, no, Emily doesn't know yet. I glanced at the mirror. Ryan was staring out the side window. Relaxed. Completely unaware. The offer. What offer? A few minutes later, I got my answer. Phoenix is perfect. My stomach tightened. Phoenix. Arizona. Over 1,800 miles from Columbus. Another pause. Then, once we're married, moving will make sense. I nearly missed my exit. Not because of anger, because Emily had never mentioned Phoenix. Not once. That Sunday she came over for dinner, like she often did. She brought a pasta salad. Linda made pot roast. The Cincinnati Reds game played quietly on television in the family room. Normal. Comfortable. The kind of evening I'd always hoped my daughter would still want after she became an adult. At one point, Emily helped me clear plates from the table. I kept my voice casual. How's wedding planning? She smiled. Busy. I bet. We finally booked a photographer. That's good. A few seconds passed. Then I asked, so what happens after the wedding? What do you mean? You staying in Columbus? She laughed. Of course. That answer hit me harder than I expected. I tried not to react. Never thought about moving? She shook her head. My whole life is here. Then she smiled. Besides, Ryan loves Ohio. I nearly dropped a dinner plate. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. Around 2 in the morning, Linda rolled over. Still awake? Yep. You believe her? Absolutely. Then maybe Ryan hasn't told her. Neither of us said anything after that. Because we both knew what it meant if he hadn't. The following week, I started noticing patterns. Not dramatic things. Small things. The kind most people miss. Ryan constantly referred to decisions as if they'd already been made. He'd say things like, we're buying. We're moving. We're doing this. But never. We've discussed. Or, we've decided. One Tuesday morning, he spent nearly 20 minutes on the phone with a real estate agent. He wasn't looking at homes in Ohio. He was discussing neighborhoods in Arizona, school districts, property taxes, commute times, the whole thing. Yet every time Emily visited our house, she talked about the future as if she expected to stay right where she was. Two completely different realities, and only one of them knew it. The situation started eating at me. I found myself distracted, short-tempered. One afternoon, I snapped at Linda over absolutely nothing. 5 minutes later, I apologized. She simply looked at me and said, "You need facts, Frank." She was right. Facts, not assumptions, not fears. Facts. A few days later, I got them. At least the first real piece. Ryan climbed into the car looking irritated. Not angry, frustrated. Like someone whose plans weren't moving quickly enough. He immediately called someone. Speakerphone. Again. The man had the privacy instincts of a golden retriever. Did the attorney finish it? Ryan asked. A pause. Then he nodded. Good. More silence. Then, I don't care if she reads every page. He laughed. A cold little laugh. The prenup is written exactly how I wanted it. I felt every muscle in my back tighten. Prenup. Emily had never mentioned a prenup. Not once. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she didn't. I kept listening. The whole point is protecting future assets. Pause. Exactly. Another pause. Then the sentence that stayed with me. If things don't work out, I won't be walking away with nothing. When he ended the call, my hands felt damp against the steering wheel. I drove another 10 minutes before dropping him off. The moment he left, I pulled into a gas station parking lot. Not because I needed gas, because I needed air. I sat there staring through the windshield, trying to process what I just heard. moving plans, hidden job offers, a prenup Emily had never mentioned. Maybe none of it was illegal. Maybe none of it was even immoral. But every piece pointed in the same direction. Ryan wasn't building a future with my daughter. He was building one around her. And for the first time, I began wondering whether the wedding itself was only part of a larger plan. A plan Emily hadn't been invited to help create. For about a week after hearing Ryan mention the prenup, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started doubting myself. Not because the facts disappeared, because they were getting harder to interpret. If Ryan had been openly cheating on Emily, things would have been simple. If he'd been stealing money or lying about his identity, that would have been simple too. But this was murkier, more uncomfortable. Because on the surface, Ryan looked like a man planning for his future. The problem was that every future plan seemed to belong to him alone. One rainy Wednesday morning, I picked him up outside his condo a little after 7. The sky was gray. The sidewalks were wet. Ryan climbed into the back seat carrying a leather portfolio. He seemed unusually cheerful. As we headed toward downtown Columbus, he called Emily. I expected another conversation that would raise my blood pressure. Instead, I heard something entirely different. His voice softened. Hey, sweetheart. I hadn't heard that version of him before. They talked about dinner plans, a movie, something funny that had happened at her school. Emily laughed. Ryan laughed. And for a moment, he sounded genuinely happy. When the call ended, I sat there confused. That was the problem. Ryan wasn't pretending. At least not completely. He cared about her. I was sure of it, which somehow made everything worse. Because people expect villains to be obvious. Real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes people hurt others while believing they're doing the right thing. That realization stayed with me all day. That evening, I told Linda. She listened quietly while folding laundry in our bedroom. When I finished, she looked up. So maybe he loves her. I think he does. Then what's the problem? I sat down on the edge of the bed. The problem is, he thinks he knows what's best for her. Linda stopped folding. Now she understood. We both did. Because we'd seen it before. Not in marriage, in parenting. It's easy to confuse love with control. Easy to start believing your decisions are automatically better than someone else's, especially when you're convinced you're helping. Ryan wasn't treating Emily like a partner. He was treating her like a project. And projects don't get a vote. A few days later, another piece of the puzzle appeared. Not through spying, not through secret investigations, through pure arrogance. Ryan spent nearly 40 minutes on the phone during one ride. The conversation sounded like a strategy meeting. Retirement accounts, investment structures, joint assets, tax advantages. Most of it went over my head, but certain parts didn't. At one point he said, once Emily leaves counseling, we can simplify everything. I nearly looked into the mirror. Leaves counseling. Not if. When? A few minutes later. 2 incomes aren't necessary. Then, she worries too much about independence. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Emily loved her work. She wasn't getting rich doing it. School counselors rarely do. But she cared deeply about those kids. She talked about them constantly. The successes, the struggles, the little victories. Ryan talked about her career like it was a hobby she'd eventually outgrow. That weekend, Emily stopped by again. This time alone. Linda was running errands. For about an hour, it was just the two of us sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. I kept telling myself not to push, not to pry. Then I failed. How's the wedding budget looking? She smiled. Pretty good. You keeping separate accounts? The smile faded slightly. Dad. What? She laughed. That was random. I shrugged. Just asking. Emily studied me for a second. Too long. Then she asked, is this about Ryan? My stomach dropped. I tried to play it off. Apparently badly. because she immediately crossed her arms. What is going on with you lately? Nothing. Dad, I'm just being careful. About what? I hesitated. Big mistake. Emily saw it instantly. Her expression changed. Not angry. Defensive. You don't trust him. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because there wasn't a good answer. She shook her head. I knew it. Emily! No. Her voice cracked slightly. He's been nothing but good to me. I stared down at my coffee. Maybe? The second the word left my mouth, I regretted it. Emily pushed her chair back. Not dramatically. Just enough. You know what hurts? I looked up. She looked exhausted. Every time something good happens in my life, you start waiting for it to fall apart. That one landed. Hard. Because there was some truth in it. Not all of it, but enough. The conversation ended badly. Worse than badly. By the time she left, neither of us felt heard. For the next 12 days, she barely answered my calls. Those were some of the longest days I'd had in years. Linda tried to reassure me. Didn't help much. Every morning I kept driving Ryan. Every evening I wondered if I'd already ruined my relationship with my daughter. Then just when I was considering giving up entirely, fate handed me something I couldn't ignore. Ryan got into the car on a Thursday afternoon looking excited, almost giddy. The second he sat down, he called someone. Everything's booked. Pause. Then a laugh. No, she still doesn't know. I felt my pulse quicken. The call continued. And within 30 seconds, I understood why. Ryan had reserved a ballroom at Brookside Golf and Country Club. A large engagement celebration. Nearly 100 guests. Family. Friends. Co-workers. Everyone important in their lives. Then came the part that made my stomach turn. Ryan planned to use the event to announce their move to Arizona. Publicly. In front of everyone. Without discussing it with Emily first. He described it as a surprise. A gift. A grand romantic gesture. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Because I finally understood something. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about cheating. It wasn't even about deception. Ryan genuinely believed he had the right to make life-changing decisions for someone else. And if I was going to stop this wedding, I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof Emily couldn't ignore. As Ryan stepped out of the car that afternoon, he smiled. For the first time all week, completely confident, completely certain, and completely unaware that his own plan had just given me the opportunity I'd been searching for. For the first time since this whole mess started, I had something concrete. Not proof that Ryan was a criminal. Not proof that he was cheating. Something far more useful. A pattern. A pattern of making major decisions for Emily without ever treating her like an equal partner. The challenge was figuring out what to do with it. Because simply telling her wasn't going to work. I'd already tried pushing. That conversation at my kitchen table had proved exactly how badly that could backfire. The harder I pushed, the more she defended him. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. If someone had criticized Linda before we got married, I probably would have done the same thing. People don't like being told they're wrong about someone they love. They have to discover it themselves. A few days later, I met an old friend for breakfast. His name was Gary Wallace, retired Columbus police detective. We'd known each other almost 30 years. The kind of friend who doesn't say much unless it matters. We met at a little diner off Riverside Drive. Same place we'd been meeting once a month since retirement. Gary listened while I explained everything. The rides, the phone calls, the hidden job offer, the Arizona announcement, the prenup. When I finished, he took a sip of coffee. You're looking for a smoking gun. Maybe. You won't find one. That wasn't the answer I wanted. What do you mean? Gary shrugged. Because guys like this usually aren't criminals. I frowned. So what are they? They're people who think they're smarter than everyone else. That hit closer to home than I liked. Gary leaned forward. You don't need proof Ryan is evil. I'm listening. You need proof Emily isn't getting the full story. Simple. Practical. Exactly the kind of advice Gary always gave. As I drove home, I realized he was right. This wasn't about destroying Ryan. It was about exposing the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. The next few weeks became a balancing act. Every morning I'd drive Ryan downtown. Every evening I'd debate whether I was doing the right thing. Some days I felt justified. Other days I felt like a sneaky old man spying on his daughter's fiance. I hated that feeling. More than once I considered quitting the driving job altogether. Then Ryan would climb into the back seat and remind me why I couldn't. One Tuesday morning he spent 20 minutes talking about Emily's future. Not with Emily, with a colleague. She'll thank me eventually. I remember that sentence clearly, because people who say things like that usually aren't listening to anyone except themselves. A few minutes later, he added, honestly, she worries too much about being independent. I nearly laughed, not because it was funny, because Emily had spent her entire adult life being independent. She bought her own car, paid off her student loans, worked through graduate school. Ryan talked about independence like it was some temporary phase she'd eventually outgrow. The more he talked, the clearer everything became. He wasn't trying to hurt her. That would have been easier to expose. He genuinely believed his plans were better than hers. And that belief made him dangerous. One morning, something happened that almost made me lose my composure. Ryan climbed into the car, unusually cheerful. As we headed toward downtown, he suddenly started talking to me. Actually talking. For the first time in months. Married? He asked. I almost laughed. The man had spent half a year sitting behind me and only now noticed I existed. 35 years. Wow. He nodded. Any advice? For a second, I considered telling him exactly what I thought. Instead, I said, listen more than you talk. He chuckled. That's it. Worked for me. Ryan smiled politely. Then spent the next 15 minutes talking about himself. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. When I told Linda that story later, she nearly fell off the couch. You're kidding. I wish. After 6 months? 6 months. She shook her head. Frank, if this wasn't so serious, it'd be hilarious. The truth was, there were moments that were funny. Ryan treated me like furniture, like part of the vehicle. He'd discuss business deals, vacation plans, arguments, private conversations, all in front of the one person he should have been careful around, his future father-in-law. The irony would have been unbelievable if I hadn't lived it. As the engagement celebration approached, I began quietly gathering documentation. Nothing illegal, nothing complicated. Just facts. I verified the Phoenix job offer, confirmed the ballroom reservation, tracked timelines, compared dates, collected emails Emily had shown us over the months. By themselves, none of those things meant much. Together, they told a story Ryan never intended anyone to see. Meanwhile, Emily and I remained distant, not completely estranged, but different, careful, polite. Every conversation felt like walking across thin ice. That hurt more than I expected. One evening, Linda found me sitting alone in the garage. I wasn't doing anything, just sitting, thinking. She walked over and leaned against the workbench. You miss her? I nodded. Yeah. Linda was quiet. Then she said, whatever happens next, make sure you're doing it for Emily. I am. No. She shook her head gently. Make sure you're not doing it because you're angry. That stopped me cold. Because the truth was, I was angry. Not just at Ryan, at myself. For not knowing sooner. For letting things get this far. For potentially losing my daughter's trust. Linda squeezed my shoulder, then went back inside. And I sat there for another 20 minutes thinking about what she'd said. The next morning, Ryan got into the car carrying a garment bag. He looked excited, nervous too. The engagement celebration was less than 24 hours away. As we approached his office, he glanced up from his phone. Big day tomorrow. That's what I hear. He grinned. Biggest day of my life so far. I kept my eyes on the road. I hope it goes well. Oh, it will. The confidence in his voice was absolute. Then he laughed. You know, my fiance has no idea what's coming. My grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. No, she didn't. But neither did he. When we reached the curb, Ryan opened the door, then paused. For some reason, he looked directly at me. Really looked. Maybe for the first time. Not enough to recognize me. Just enough to acknowledge I was another human being. Thanks, Frank. The sound of my own name coming from him felt strange. I nodded. You're welcome. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, straightened his jacket, and headed toward the office building. Tomorrow, he planned to unveil his perfect future. Tomorrow, I planned to let Emily see exactly who had designed it. The engagement celebration was held on a Saturday evening at Brookside Golf and Country Club. A warm June night. Clear skies. Perfect weather. The kind of evening people remember for all the right reasons. Or at least that was the plan. Linda and I arrived a little before 6. The parking lot was already filling up. Inside, the ballroom looked beautiful. White tablecloths, fresh flowers, soft lighting. A string quartet played near the entrance. Someone had spent a lot of money putting the whole thing together. Emily looked happy. That was the hardest part. When we walked in, she came straight over and hugged us. For a moment, she was 10 years old again. The same smile, the same warmth, the same trust. And I almost lost my nerve. Almost. Because as much as I wanted to protect her from pain, I couldn't protect her from reality. Not anymore. The evening started normally. People mingled. Servers carried trays of appetizers. Guests laughed and shared stories. Ryan moved through the room like a politician working a campaign event. Shaking hands, making jokes, collecting compliments. Several times I caught him glancing toward the small stage near the front of the ballroom. Waiting, preparing, building toward his big moment. Around 7:30, everyone began taking their seats. The room settled. Forks stopped clinking. Conversations faded. Ryan stepped onto the stage holding a champagne glass. The crowd applauded. Emily stood beside him, smiling, completely unaware. Ryan thanked everyone for coming. Then he launched into a polished speech. The man was good. I'd give him that. He talked about family, commitment, building a future together. He thanked Emily, thanked both families, thanked his coworkers. People nodded along. A few guests even dabbed their eyes. Then he reached the part he'd been waiting for. His surprise. I've always believed life rewards bold decisions, he said. The room grew quiet. Ryan smiled at Emily. I wanted tonight to be unforgettable. Emily laughed softly. What did you do? A few people chuckled. Ryan turned back toward the crowd, then announced it. Emily and I are excited to begin our next chapter together in Phoenix, Arizona. Applause erupted instantly. At first. Then it started fading. Because Emily wasn't clapping. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't moving. She looked confused. Genuinely confused. Ryan noticed. His smile wavered. Just slightly. Enough for me to see it. Emily leaned closer. What are you talking about? The microphone picked it up. The room became very still. Ryan laughed nervously. The move. What move? A few guests exchanged glances. Ryan tried again. The job opportunity. Emily stared at him. Then came 4 words that changed the entire evening. What job opportunity? Silence. Absolute silence. You could have heard someone drop a spoon. Ryan looked around the room. For the first time all night, he seemed unsure of himself. That was my moment. I stood, slowly, No dramatic speech. No shouting. No scene. Just a 61-year-old father standing beside a banquet table. Ryan looked toward me, then looked again. This time longer. Much longer. I watched recognition begin forming behind his eyes. Not fully. Just enough. Like a puzzle piece sliding into place. The voice. The face. The name. His expression changed. Frank? I nodded. Yeah. His face lost color. A few guests looked confused. Emily looked even more confused. Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I spoke calmly. Emily, before anyone makes another announcement, I think there are a few questions worth asking. Nobody interrupted. Not even Ryan. Questions about what? Emily asked quietly. I looked at her. Not him. Always her. When did Ryan tell you he accepted a job in Arizona? Emily turned toward Ryan. He said nothing. That answer spoke loudly enough. I continued. When did he tell you he'd already researched neighborhoods? No response. When did he tell you he'd started planning your relocation? Still nothing. The room felt frozen. Ryan finally stepped forward. Frank, this isn't the place. I looked at him. Really? That landed harder than I intended. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Emily folded her arms. Her voice was calm now. Too calm. When were you planning to tell me? Ryan swallowed. I was going to. When? No answer. The silence stretched. Ryan tried changing directions. It was supposed to be a surprise. Emily shook her head. A surprise vacation is a surprise. The room remained completely still. She continued. Moving me across the country isn't. I could see panic beginning to appear behind Ryan's eyes. The confident speaker from 15 minutes earlier was disappearing. Fast. I reached into my jacket pocket and handed Emily several printed documents. Nothing secret. Nothing illegal. Copies of information I'd verified over the previous month. Job offer details. Housing research. Planning timelines. Dates. Facts. Emily looked through them slowly. Page after page. Each one telling the same story. A future designed without her involvement. Ryan started talking. Trying to explain. Trying to justify. Trying to reframe. But the more he spoke, the worse it became. Because every explanation revealed the same thing. He hadn't asked. He hadn't discussed. He had decided. Finally, Emily looked up. There were tears in her eyes. But not the kind I'd expected. Not heartbreak. Clarity. The painful kind. You kept calling it our future. Ryan opened his mouth. She didn't let him speak. But every decision belonged to you. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Emily slipped the engagement ring from her finger. Slowly. Carefully. She placed it in Ryan's hand. The room seemed to stop breathing. I loved you, she said quietly. I know, Ryan answered. For the first time all evening, he sounded sincere. Maybe he was. Emily nodded. I believe that. Then she looked directly at him. But you never respected me. Those words hit harder than anything else that night. Because they were true. Ryan wasn't a monster. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't even pretending to love her. The problem was simpler. And sadder. He loved being in charge more than he loved being a partner. 10 minutes later, he walked out alone. No shouting. No security. No dramatic ending. Just a man carrying the weight of his own choices. The weeks afterward weren't easy. Emily was hurt. Embarrassed. Angry. Some of that anger landed on me. Fairly, if I'm being honest. Healing takes time. Trust does too. But slowly things improved. 6 months later, she enrolled in a graduate certification program she'd been considering for years. She bought a small townhouse outside Columbus. Nothing fancy. Just hers. And for the first time in a long while, she seemed excited about the future again. One Sunday afternoon, she came over for dinner. Just like old times. As we cleaned dishes afterward, she looked at me and smiled. You know, Dad. What? You were annoying. I laughed. Only annoying? Extremely annoying. That's fair. She bumped my shoulder. Then added, but thank you. That was enough. More than enough. Looking back, I've realized something. For most of my life, I thought protecting my daughter meant solving problems for her. It doesn't. Sometimes it means showing someone the truth and trusting them to decide what comes next. If you've ever faced a moment where telling the truth risked damaging a relationship, then you probably know how hard that choice can be. Sometimes it's worth it anyway. Thanks for listening to my story.